Syed Hyder Raza was born on 22nd February 1922 at Bavaria in the Mandla district of Madhya Pradesh. He was one of the founder members of the Progressive Artist Society that was established in 1947 in Bombay. The 6 members of the PAG had certain things in common, and so the thread of commonality that held them together was first and foremost their very strong desire to completely abandon and marginalize the academic naturalism that had become a part of the pedagogy at the Sir J.J. School of Art and supported by Bombay Art Society. Secondly, all the 6 members had leaning towards Marxism. Although most of them showed it in their paintings, Raza was one where he had Marxist inclinations, but it never appeared in his works as such. From the age of 12, Raza showed a predilection towards drawing, and his father was a forest officer, and Bavaria was a small village surrounded by thick forests. He finished his early schooling here. Later on, he moved on to another town where he finished it. And then he came to Nagpur, where he studied art at the Nagpur Art Institution. And in 1943, along with Ara, he came to Bombay. And he expressed a desire equally to join the Sir J.J. School of Art, which he did, and his creativity flowered even more here. Raza in 1948 had an opportunity of looking at the prints of the French artists, and he was so inspired and influenced by looking at them that he took a decision that he must see them personally. This exhibition was held at Alliance Française. Raza settled in Bombay, and he did a large number of landscapes. Landscape seems to have had been a favored theme of all the 6 artists, and they rendered it accordingly, but never with any kind of academic naturalism. So the landscapes he created, he submitted them to the Bombay Art Society, and he also won a few prizes. The scenes that he rendered were those of the maximum city, namely painting it under the light as well as under the rains. He painted the streets, the sea, the various houses, the various localities, and created many of the urban scapes of the city of Bombay. These works or these landscapes which Raza painted, they were strongly impressionist in character, and his attempt was to capture the life, the vitality and energy of the city of Bombay and its urban surroundings. In 1948, he also, not in 1948, but in 1950, he won a French scholarship, and that is how he decided to move to Paris. So he settled down in Paris. Of course, his early years financially were very tough. He found it difficult, but he never gave up his dedication to art, and he continued to paint landscapes. The landscapes that he painted, of course, had a lot of memories of his childhood, his travels, and when he was in Kashmir, he had met the French photographer, Henri Cartier-Bresson, and he had suggested to Raza that he must look at Cubist paintings. And Raza followed his advice and started working in a Cubist style with broken structure, of which he did a few still life, and later on he extended this experience of Cubist style also into his landscapes. These early works of Raza, where he had done a large number of landscapes, they are particularly noticeable in the way he has perceived them. The vantage points he uses, the angles with which he makes up or constructs his composition are equally valid. So much so that when he came to France, he continued to paint the French landscape. And slowly, by 1956, he had already won the highest artistic award, namely Prix de la Critique award, which showed that he was now being part of the artistic fraternity, accepted by the public as well as by the critic and the art institutions. But somehow he was not too very happy. But yet he continued to paint, and he did paint landscapes for a long time until about 1975. In between, he also traveled to US on teaching assignments, teaching at New York as well as in California. And it was here that he also had an exposure to the abstract expressionists, particularly the post-painterly abstractionists, Mark Rothko and others, which made a deep impression on him. By 1975, though Raza was well established, was doing very well, was accepted, and he could have continued in the same way. But then his restless mind did not allow him to rest, and he felt and he questioned himself, where am I in this painting, or where is my India here? And it is this quest, it is this search which led him on to an internal journey. And he says that, it is important to realize that one's identity should begin with a thread on which are hung the experiences of the childhood, later supplemented by eclectic search as a result of various studies and the acquired knowledge. He says, there came a time when I wanted to start from the beginning. I wanted to close all the books, never visit a museum again, and not to look at any other artist's work. In other words, for me, an internal journey had begun. Now, this was a very important dimension of Raza's journey in the development of his artistry as well as his thematic content. He began to search, and in his search, he went to the very bottom of the earth, namely the source and its beginning. So this source or the beginning was the earth, and for him it translated metaphorically into a circle, which he called it as a bindu. Of course, bindu as such is an abstract symbol that comes from a non-figurative tantric tradition which utilizes art in a special way by creating yantras or diagrams that have magical powers leading to transformation of the consciousness. And this bindu was what he described in all of his paintings, was manifest in all of his works, and it was where the beginning and the end happened. Because it was in bindu that all the energies were contained, and it was from the same bindu that the energies also emanated. Extending it further, the same bindu also became a shunya, which was nothing but everything. And also as a bija or a seed, the potential for full creation. So this dimension of a symbolism of an abstraction, which was very philosophical, was the result of his internal contemplation, meditation, and he felt that he had to go back to his roots, and unconsciously or subconsciously, he somehow had felt a very strong connect to his Indian tradition. So much so that when he was on this journey, he started reading on Indian philosophy, Indian aesthetics, and particularly Indian poetry. And in rendering his canvases and in rendering his very famous Bindu series. Today, when we think of Raza, we only think in terms of his Bindu series, and with what versatility, diversity, he was able to create all of the entire series in a distinct and in a very different way. So, being in an alien land, he somehow realized that the energy of his identity was to find his roots and make a connectivity to it. And that is how he goes back to his tradition, and it was this tradition which enabled him to mark a posture of difference. The colors that he used in his works were mainly primary red, blue and yellow with black and white. The 5 colors, which also symbolically and metaphorically found correspondence with the Panch Tattvas, or the 5 elements, namely the earth, water, sky, air and space, as well as it was also a metaphor for the 5 senses. Raza's famous axiom was that about his perception was very distinct, very different. And when he talked about his perception, he says, "Mano to Shankar hai, na mano to Kankar hai." Meaning that if you believe, then it is God Shankar, otherwise it is simply a stone. So what was important is how one perceives the world. And this was something very distinct, very intuitively, instinctively, which Raza had developed. So his Bindu series basically are abstract symbols, and how he philosophically, intellectually manipulated it and created series not only on the Bindu, on the Panchatattva, also on the Purusha and the Prakriti, that is the creation of nature. In this respect, there was always an underlying duality that existed in his works. The contrast of light and dark that one always notices in his Bindu series, where he has intensities of colors which are divided by jagged white lines, and these jagged white lines basically was a reflection of his own personality, in other words, his own identity, where he was in an alien land and that the society in which he was settled was very distinct from the one which he had left behind. So in order to establish his identity, he had to make a connect with his tradition, and this tradition was an abstract tradition of the tantric art that he brought into it, and its various other philosophies and various other aspects and forms, which resulted in Raza creating these abstractions, which were extremely intellectuals in the way he planned it, he thought it out, and then he composed it. Now, the duality which I was talking about was mainly to do with his experiences of the childhood. It goes back to his early memories, where he had declared himself that during the day it was very lively, it was very serene, very quiet amidst the nature. But when night came, that is when he became very fearful, because the night was thick, dark, intense, black. There was absolutely no sound except perhaps for the distant sounds of the Gonds, tribals, dancing and its music. So, and then he says when the light came on, then again the world became very different. So this duality of light and dark, of positive and negative, of pessimism and optimism, all of these became very internalized within him. And at the right significant moment, it seems to have manifested itself. And that is how, when we look at his Bindu series, we find this duality of light and dark. And he says that that his own art was a result of his own experiences, particularly the mystical engagement with nature and its forms, that he expressed it in line, color, space and light. So those white edges, the hidden ones which seems to, breathe life onto the canvas between the intensities of color, is where one finds the emanation of light. And this hidden white light that emanates from it, metaphorically, also speaks about Raza's identity and his identity, which he never lost it, that of an Indian settled in an alien land. So Raza's works in that way are philosophical in nature, intensely thought out, very intellectual. And today he remains one of the most important, celebrated Indian modernists who carved a very different niche for himself in the modernism that India was developing post-independence.